quote an interview Janet Yellen, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, did with Anderson Cooper on Friday. Secretary Yellen, what's your message tonight for Americans who are rattled by what they've experienced in the last days and weeks and are concerned about their retirement accounts and nervous about a recession? Janet Yellen said, well, this is the worst self-inflicted policy wound I've ever seen in my career inflicted on our economy. The Trump tariff plans are doing immense damage to our economy. You can see that in the stock market and the impact of these tariffs are expected to have on American households. And we're even beginning to see what looks like a flight away from dollar-based assets in the financial markets, which is really a scary development. Anderson Cooper said, how long, the damage to the reputation of the United States, to the confidence people have or had around the world toward the United States is reflected in the dollar and investments. How long does something like that take to rebuild? Janet Yellen said, well, I think that could take a long time to rebuild. Dollar assets have long been regarded as the safest in the world, especially U.S. Treasury bonds and bills. They form the core of the whole global financial system. And what we see this week was a sharp increase, one of the biggest increases on record over the space of a week in the long-term Treasury yields, almost 50 basis points, and at the same time a decline in the value of the dollar. This is a really unusual pattern because in chaotic times, usually the Treasury yields fall. The Treasury bonds are a safe haven. People buy them. That's not what is happening now. They're selling Treasuries, and there's also a downward pressure on the dollar. Anderson Cooper said, there's a pending litigation on whether the president can fire the heads of independent government agencies. And a major question is, depending on how that litigation is resolved, is whether he might try to oust Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. You served as a Federal Reserve Chair. What happens if that job becomes simply another political appointee who serves at the pleasure of the president? Janet Yellen said, well, it's well understood that countries that have independent central banks exhibit better economic performance. And there's a very good reason for that. It's that independent central banks are not driven by politics. And when those central banks are politically driven, they tend to do things that are destabilizing to economies. So this is a development that would greatly concern me, and I think it should concern all Americans. That's the end of the interview. So it's interesting to note what Janet Yellen said about independent central banks that are not run politically. When you look at what's happened to the country, Turkey, over the years, the central bank was taken over politically and ordered what to do by the political head of the country, Turkey. And years later, inflation went through the roof. And years later, they still have today about like 40% inflation. It's almost a miracle that the country still even runs because the political head made the central bank do the opposite of what it should have, thereby fanning the flames of inflation even more. So, and even Putin made a joke that he didn't want to become like Turkey, the inflation. That was I believe right before he started the war, maybe right after. Before all the sanctions started hitting his country now, because now Russia has inflation now too, So there's so much criminality, corruption, and international money laundering in and out of Turkey now. It's run in similar ways to Russia, where the leader basically tries to be a criminal mafia boss and orders everyone else what to do, whether it's logical or not, truthful or not. And anyone who doesn't do otherwise is basically jailed, who opposes the mafia boss. Turkey and Russia have some of the highest organized crime rates in the world. Many Russian criminals that were sanctioned by the United States, they fled to Turkey. Now and all their money's now in Turkey. Their ships and stuff that if they were able to get out of, weasel out of any sanctions or get by, anyone who still have ships and that stuff, they docked in Turkey. And Turkey's also been a safe haven for Hamas and ISIS terrorists.